Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started because I'm standing up here, the laptop is hooked up, and you're sitting there. So I'm going to start. All right. Anyway, so I'm talking about 2 years and 200 audits later. My name is Sock from C4, Code4rena, and some of you are probably wondering what the hell Code4rena is. Most of you may have heard, because I see a lot of folks that I recognize. But basically, Code4rena pioneered the competitive audit. And the basic concept is, rather than a fixed-time audit with a few quality auditors taking a look at the code, the approach that we use is we bring in 100-plus auditors competing to find bugs and get a share of the prize pool. And we do this generally in a few days or a week or a couple weeks in some instances, sometimes longer with larger scopes. But basically, based on the volume that we have, based on the surveying that we've done of the auditors in our community and the time that they put in on audits, we estimate that we roughly have about 6 months worth of in-depth code review delivered in one calendar week, which is pretty stunning, actually. And the nice thing also is that when folks have a desire to incentivize more top talent to audit their code, they just can add more funds to the prize pool. Really, the core concept, I think, is outstandingly explained by a talk that Sebastian Banescu gave from QuantStamp at, I think, was EthCC 2021, and based on what they identified from a large volume of data in audits they looked at, the more auditors that you have with eyes on the code, the more bugs that are found. And so the model that we're trying to do is, how can we get as many auditors to be reviewing the code simultaneously? And the model that we use isn't like a bug bounty where essentially you're first in or you're nothing, right? The model is essentially everyone gets compensated based on the value of the bug. The value of the bug is determined based on how severe the issue is, as well as how rare it is. So if you find a solo high severity issue, you're going to make a pretty decent penny. Or in the matter of really well-hardened code that's already gone through several rounds of audits, as was the case in a recent event, we had one person who had a single medium that was the most severe case, ended with a $70,000 result. So really, the reality is that this community ends up finding more smart contract bugs faster than anyone, and we openly share all of the findings and learnings from the community. So you can go to the GitHub for Code4rena and see all of the past audits. You can see everything that anyone ever submitted, and you can see them matched up by their duplicates. You can see the ones that made it into the report, the ones that didn't. And in fact, there's actually, I just saw this last, I think yesterday, or maybe the day before, there's academic research that's being performed based on the public data that we've made available from these audits that are out there. And a big thing, and this is something I'm super passionate about in how C4 works, is that we really empower new Web3 auditors to become leading security experts. There's so many people that have come through our community who have started as really pretty early on in their path as an auditor, and have been able to progress through and become some extremely dominant folks in the space with some really well-known names. And it's been a joy just to see that. And the cool thing is, it's entirely permissionless, and so it doesn't matter. You don't have to sign up for an interview. You don't have to show up. You just show up and compete, sign in with your wallet, and away you go. And a big part, and this is really fundamental, is we're always working to ensure that people are paid fairly for their contributions. And this is a big part of why we don't take the straight-up bounty model. It's a big part of why we ensure that people get paid for and have a way to get paid, even if, indeed, the code is extremely well hardened. And so we have QA reports and gas optimization reports that people can submit and also earn a share of the prize pool. one thing that's really unique, I think, about C4 is that it was started not by auditors, but by audit customers. So Scott Lewis and Zach Cole originally created the design for Code4rena, and I was just some rando on the internet that happened to see them tweeting about this concept that they were going to try out for Slingshot. So they're co-founders of Slingshot and Dex Aggregator, and they needed an audit for their platform, and they said, let's let's get as good a one as we can, but they couldn't get one booked with a top audit firm for months, and so they said, let's reach out to all the white hats we know, throw up a pool, and see what we get. And the result was pretty awesome from the very get-go. And a key thing is that these were builders who wanted very good, very fast, and very fairly priced audits, which is pretty hard to get because the market is just so much demand there. So ultimately, what C4 is a multi-stakeholder DAO that ends up being made up of auditors and builders, investors and users who are all interested in the same goal of seeing the space be more secure. So now I want to talk about DAOs. I want to talk about what we've learned in the process of building our DAO and in operating it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're building a DAO, it's choose your own adventure. I heard it said in the last panel, you've got to make the decision yourself about what your design looks like. You're making choices ultimately along the way, and this is critical whether you acknowledge them or not. And you're making decisions about priorities. So there's a really good talk and essay called "Choose Boring Technology" from like 2015 by a guy named Dan McKinley, and he talks about the idea of innovation tokens. And basically, it's like, if you're thinking about a startup, as a startup, you're trying to do something probably hard and probably trying to disrupt some area. And if you're doing that, you also are making technology choices along the way. Well, if you spend all of your innovation tokens making interesting technology choices, you have less innovation tokens to focus on the hard problems you're trying to solve. And so the concept that he talks about is you basically should be trying to climb up Maslow's hierarchy. So rather than focusing on the fundamentals of what the technology is doing, you should be focusing on how are you going to solve the big problem that you're focused on. And that is a big thing. We made a lot of trade-offs, especially early on, as we formed the DAO in terms of technology. I mean, the early tools that we created for people making submissions, it's not on chain at all. It's basically, I threw together a form and it dumps into GitHub, and then people use GitHub to triage the reports. It could have been more decentralized, but that wasn't the point of what we were trying to do. Ultimately, we were trying to figure out how do we bring in as many auditors as possible, and that's the thing we're most trying to decentralize and scale. I want to talk about this concept that I saw Cory Doctorow talk about on Twitter a little bit ago called enshittification, because I think it has a lot of relevance in the context of thinking of particularly a multi-stakeholder DAO and one that has multi-sided market involved. So enshittification is what he described as a seemingly inevitable consequence arising from the combination of the ease of changing how a platform allocates value combined with the nature of a two-sided market. Now he gets into describing this a little bit better. So he says, here's how platforms die. First, they're good to their users, and he gives an example of Amazon in the way that Amazon was just outstanding, or Google was outstanding in what they were trying to do for users at first. So they're good to their users, then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers, and finally they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. This is enshittification. Surpluses are first directed to users, then once they're locked in, surpluses go to suppliers, then once they're locked in, the surplus is handed to shareholders, and the platform becomes a useless pile of shit. So the biggest thing, when we look at how do we manage the growth that we're trying to achieve, the question that we're trying to answer is how do we avoid enshittification? Again, you're making choices about your organization, whether you acknowledge them or not in a DAO. Joe Freeman, badass, may be anybody in the DAO space has heard her name before, and this essay, The Tyranny of Structurelessness, which basically says that you may think that you are aiming to create an hierarchy-less organization or flat structure or whatever, but the reality is that every organization has hidden hierarchy. even ones that have hierarchy. And so if you're not working to figure that shit out, you're just kind of having this game that you're playing where the real hierarchy nobody can see and nobody can participate in. And that's a big challenge. I love this quote from anarchist Enrico Malatesta. Organization, far from creating authority, is the only cure for it. Directly in line with the thoughts of Joe Freeman. Another badass that I think builds on this concept and takes it a little farther is Elinor Ostrom, who her piece of contribution to this discourse is big enough and impactful enough that as a political scientist, she won the Nobel Prize for Economics, which has never been done. Usually, Nobel Prize for Economics is won by economists. But she basically was addressing, there's an essay from, that we've all heard the term of the tragedy of the commons, and basically she was trying to say that there are ways to avoid the tragedy of the commons, and she did an enormous amount of research in identifying what are some areas where the commons has been preserved and strengthened, and what are the systems that make that happen. And I think this is a completely interesting way to look at DAOs and whether we're being successful in the actual pursuit that we're going after as an organization. And one of the big things that she comes away with, the institutional design matters a lot. She's got these 8 principles. So I'm gonna go through them, and then the thing I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna walk through the ways that I think. And I'm going to be a little more generous than my first grading, but the ways that I think Code4rena has graded against this scorecard and why. But I'm going to be a little more generous based on some initial feedback that I got on my scorecard. But anyway, so her 8 principles are these. Clear boundaries for everyone using commons, rules in line with local conditions, those impacted by rules have a voice in changing the rules, monitors keep tabs on behavior and are accountable, graduated sanctions for out-of-bound behavior, conflict resolution mechanisms, and then nested groups with different roles and responsibilities. You'll note that there is no 7th principle on that, which is because the right to design your own institutions is not challenged by governmental authorities, which, just a side-eye to the entire U.S. Regulatory apparatus right now. So we'll focus on the 8 because I don't think that's something that we can fit into the scorecard for how Code4rena is doing. So what are we doing well? I would say from the Ostrom scorecard, again, clearly defined boundaries for everyone using the commons. I actually give us an A+ because I think one of the main things that we got right at the beginning, and I can say that because it wasn't me, is in the design there were specific roles that people could play. You could be a judge, you could be a warden. Wardens are auditors. You could be a sponsor. Sponsors are the folks with projects bringing in their projects. And everyone has a specific role to play in the dance. And then ultimately, we identified people who in the DAO were organizers, and I was the first organizer in the DAO where I was basically just putting together these different audit contests and bringing people together on that. And I feel like the fact that we had these really clearly defined roles that people could come in and play, and it wasn't everything in the world is wide open, come pick a role, decide whatever the hell you want to do, but these are the things that really matter that we need to fill, and we need to fill well, and I think we did a really good job of that. But I would say I have to give that an A+ sort of, because everyone is big, and this is the problem ultimately, is that when you talk about everyone using the commons, there are also a lot of people that have taken things that we've been building in our community and then have built other things on top of them. Ultimately, that's challenging when you're trying to grow something. And being open will make you an easy target. And ultimately, just do it anyway. Because really being open makes you more resilient. It helps you to create more value than you capture. You know that you're doing that. It keeps you accountable to always improving. And I think those are things that really matter. Then again, the Ostrom scorecard, nested groups with different roles and responsibilities is a big part of what we did. We actually formed an organization that was hired by the DAO in order to facilitate the way that these audits worked. And again, we're trying to create an unshitifiable platform. I really believe that if we ran C4 purely for profit, we'd ruin it. If we ran it as a pure on-chain democracy, we would ruin it. If we ran it to where auditors were making every decision, then we would ruin it. If customers made every decision, then we'd likely ruin it. And so we've got to set boundaries for everybody, and we've got to identify what are the roles and what are the processes involved. So we have independent judges for each audit, and then we have an independent commissioner, basically, is the best way that I think of the org that I end up working for, that's hired by the DAO. And basically, just like a commissioner in a sports league, we are not putting our hand on the scale in terms of individual outcomes, but we are there to ensure that the rules are constantly being made better for all the participants on all sides, and trying to balance the needs of the folks who are wanting audits and the folks that are providing audits, and making sure that neither side is getting taken advantage of by the system. So next item on the OSTRAM scorecard, rules in line with local conditions. I think that we're a B+ on this one, and I would say because it's in progress, because this is something, the local conditions are constantly changing. A big one that we're experiencing is I think for the first half of C4, we were in the bull market. For the second half, we were in the bear market. And in the first half, we needed as many auditors as we could get to fill the need on the side of audits that were in demand. And then we had so many auditors that right now we have about 3,500 registered auditors competing on our platform, and keeping that in balance and keeping that reasonable is a big challenge in terms of the overall systems staying on top of. And then we've got the challenge of AI, right? And as you grow any group, you have early participants who are going to be by the book, and you have the relationship strength and the trust strength of the choices they're making being in line. As you grow, you start to have more bad actors. And so trying to balance that is a constant battle, and trying to figure out how do we have the right touch in different policies. And so this is something that's always in progress, and it feels like we're always a little bit behind the curve, but always working on it. Monitors keep tabs on behavior and are accountable. I would say the grade of B, broadly accountable in that the organization that serves as the commissioner is essentially hired by the DAO and therefore accountable. But ultimately, I think there's more accountability that could become there. Then what really should improve? Individuals impacted by rules have a voice in changing rules. They absolutely have a voice. The process is hard. The process is really hard because of the fact that when it comes to design, we have an outstanding mechanism designer in Scott Lewis, and ultimately there's an enormous amount of pressure and desire from auditors to participate in shaping exactly what the designs of the mechanism should do. However, they're only representing one side of the perspective in the whole picture, and so it becomes really difficult to entirely say, well, auditors are the vast majority of the community, they'll make the decision. We have to take that input, and then we have to balance it also against the fact that we have customers that we're serving, and they have specific needs and demands, and we also have to look at the whole. So I think that this is a really, really hard thing. We agonize over it a lot, but I think that it's something that we can always do increasingly better. And a big part of how we approach it really is keep things as simple as possible, as long as possible. I'm a big fan of the idea of non-intervention, that like a lot of times jumping in and reacting and making a decision on something can be far more harmful than letting things sit and see how they work themselves out. And we've seen that play out a number of times. We're really big on paving cow paths rather than cowing everyone onto paved paths. And so we see new approaches and ideas emerge from the community, gain some steam, and we say, yeah, let's standardize that. We also are really big on authority of expertise, not position, not numbers, and ultimately that's a big part of why we're like, when it comes to design, we're going to go, let's bring a mechanism designer in to take all the input and make the best decision possible. I love this quote from Mikhail Bakunin, well-known anarchist. Reject all authority? No. In the matter of boots, I refer to the authority of the boot maker. And that's a big part of how C4 works, in that we are absolutely trying to find the way to highlight the expertise that exists in our community. Graduated sanctions, that's a big one that we're trying to work on, especially with the growth of AI. Conflict resolution mechanisms in place. We have a lot of ideas for this, but we haven't implemented a ton of them. Generally, these things work themselves out in a very ad hoc way that's been positive, but I think systematizing that stuff is really important. That's the core of it. But ultimately, the last thing I want to leave is a high-scale multi-stakeholder DAO is an intentionally guided market. And ultimately, that means that it's a vision for how you believe the market should function. So when it comes to what we're trying to do, let's make the world we want to be part of. Thanks, everybody.